Good morning, poker people, and welcome to another Smart Poker Study video called Using Flopzilla and HoldEq to do range v range equity analysis. And this is actually a companion video to podcast episode 91. And there's a link to the show notes for episode 91 directly below this. So in podcast 91, I discussed creating cold calling ranges. This video here is going to show you how to analyze a given range for post-flop playability. And that's how well a range performs post-flop, like maybe hitting a specific hand or a certain draw. We'll compare the equity of your cold calling range versus your opponent's possible range, his opening range. I'm going to show you how to do this range v range analysis using these two programs. Now, I assume most of you have either experience with Flopzilla or you've seen it in action somewhere, maybe in another video of mine. It's a great program, but Flopzilla by itself, it's very limited to range versus hand analysis. That's great. It helps with a lot of things, but in poker, we deal a whole lot with ranges and range versus range and how they interact together, on various different boards. So to do this type of study using Flopzilla, we have to download the companion software HoldEq, and in the show notes below, you'll find links to both Flopzilla and HoldEq. And if you already have Flopzilla but don't have HoldEq yet, don't worry about paying for HoldEq, as it comes free with your Flopzilla license. Yay! So you might be saying to me, Sky, why not just use PokerStove or Equilab for range v range grunt work? Well, those programs are great, but nothing really can beat the range analysis and board analysis features that Flopzilla has. Plus, I really love the range storing and accessing features that are so easy to use and really intuitive within Flopzilla. So because of all that, I prefer Flopzilla and HoldEq for my range v range analysis. So before we actually get to work here, this is what we're going to be discussing today. The first thing we're going to discuss is looking at the post-flop playability of an opening range. The next is how the range interacts with a random flop. The next would be connecting two Flopzilla windows to HoldEq, so just some quick and simple logistics there of how to use HoldEq. The next part will be range versus range analysis, and in the fifth and final part, we'll do some range versus range analysis in relation to a given flop. So let's go ahead and get this party started. So here's our first window right here. What we want to do is choose an opening range. What I wanted to do today was go with a nitty, kind of, tight opening range here, a very simple one of 10%. So you can see this range itself, it's mostly value oriented with the best broadways and every single pair. This has post-flop playability of 37.5% when you look at top pair or better. I often look at middle pair or better when I'm thinking about playability. So we're about 50% of the time we're going to hit mid pair or better and open in a straight draw or better, plus some of these pretty good combo draws right down here. So by looking at this range, we're seeing, hey, if our opener is opening with this, he's going to hit the flop roughly 50% of the time. We can expect a lot of C-bets from this guy, or even some check calls with a lot of pretty decent mid-pair, pocket pair, below top pair kind of hands, when we're going up against this range right here. So what we want to do, when we're looking at a range, we want to think about the statistics and what kind of hands it's going to hit. But we also want to think about ranges versus different boards. And of course, you could use a hand history to do a possible range versus an exact board that you faced. But today I'm just going to select a board which will give us a little bit of analysis practice here. So on a 10-9-5 board, of course, we look at this. It's a pretty wet board with the connectors there, the 10 and the 9, plus the two hearts make for a lot of flush draws and stuff. So this particular pretty nitty range hits this flop 27.8% of the time with mid pair or better, and open in a straight draw and some combo draws right down here. We could add in gut shot draws, which he'll often continue with, or at least throw that C-bet in, and those gut shots are right up there, the king queens of course. And king queens, you don't have a made hand yet, but you do have the gut shot, plus you have 2 overs for 6 additional outs that you could hit. So most likely the gut shot is going to stay in at this point. I would say so, especially because he was the pre-flop raiser and we just called. He might think he can push us off, but still have some pretty decent equity right here. So we can look at that, on this board, that range versus this board right here. Now, when we're comparing a range and a board, we want to think about some different questions on maybe we completely whiff this board. Let's say we have a hand like 6, 7 of diamonds. We have a gut shot, but no flush draw at all. If we hit a pair, it's a third pair to the board. It's a pretty crappy hand altogether. With this hand, we only have actually 29% equity versus his range, and he has 71% equity. And this is what I've heard called hot-cold equity. This is right now given no future bets, not knowing what the turn and river is. Right now, his hand is going to win 77, or his range is going to win 71% of the time. Our hand is going to win only 29% of the time. So that's what that is. And then so when you're analyzing situations, you need to ask yourself some good questions to help you understand how to play with or against this range on this board. So of course, we have Squadouche right here, but we don't always want to give up. Maybe we called on the button here and he had opened in the cutoff. Great, we have position on the guy. We might want to continue and see if we can't blow him off of some hands in this instance, So some of the questions that you want to ask yourself, we completely whiff the flop. So let's say if he checks to us and we decide to bluff here, what are they folding out? And we could say pretty definitively, not definitively, but we can have a pretty good estimation of what he's going to fold. If he checks to us and we decide to bet, he's staying in with his sets, of course. He's staying in with the 2 pairs. He's staying in with the over pairs, with any top pairs, which he doesn't actually have. He has the over pairs right now. And then he might be staying in with the middle pairs, but he didn't hit any at all. Is he staying in with weak pairs? That's the question. Now, we know that this guy is a nitty guy. He opened up pre-flop. We have position on him. My guess is he's going to be folding most of these weak pairs right here. Ace highs, he might stay in with some of them, but some of these ace highs are part of the flush draws right here, which those are the ones that he might stay in with. Let's go ahead and we don't want to say he stays in with all over cards because that's a really big part of his range. Let's just say he stays in with all of these draws. So we click this filter. He is going to continue in the hand, as you can see, with pocket 5s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings, and aces, which are, a lot of sets and over pairs, and he's going to stay in with some of the good drawing hands as well. So, knowing this, he's going to check fold 60% of the time, or 59% of the time. He's continuing with 41%. So if we throw out just about any size bet, even a pot-sized bet, that needs to work 50% of the time. He's folding over that. That's a good bet. But we could size it a little bit smaller. Let's say we do a half pot bet. Only needs to work 33% of the time. He's folding 60% of the time. It's a profitable bet in this instance. But let's say he decides to call now. He stayed in with 41% of hands. Some of them are great hands. Some of them are drawing hands. So the next question would be, if they decide to stay in, what are they staying in with? And we've already marked those right there. Beyond that, we'll want to ask ourselves, hey, if he stayed in on the flop, is he going to stay in versus a barrel? And then we want to think about that. Well, he has sets, of course, he's staying in with, over pairs and top pairs. Let's just say a 3 of spades comes out. Doesn't help his range not really at all, What is he going to stay in if we decide to barrel right here? So we could decide, he'll stay in with the over pairs, the 2 pairs, the sets, and the straights and whatnot. He'll keep his flush draws because it's so good, and maybe he will give up now to the second street, or he'll give up on the second barrel with all of his gut shots. That's great. So he is continuing with 71% of this range. So on the turn, he's only folding about 30% of his flop continuation range. So we can use those percentages to help us gauge how much we should bet to get him to fold. All right, or whether or not we should bet at all, definitely, on that card right there. Okay, so that is looking at a range versus a board. Now, questions like these, the ones that we just asked, those will get you thinking about the range and how you can take advantage of its inherent weaknesses. Now what we want to do is we want to connect 2 Flopzilla windows to HoldEq EQ, because what we just did was compare a range versus a hand. That's good and all. Let's put those back on just so I can unmark those, because we don't need those marked. So, we've got his range right here. So what if we decided to call with we're on the button, we call versus a nitty open with a 9.4% range. So first off, the first thing we want to do, of course, is just compare our range versus his range just in general. Our range hits the flop at a mid pair or better. 47% of the time. That's a pretty darn good post-flop playability. Remember, his hand was 50% of the time he hits. So this kind of range versus his range is definitely worth calling. We can hit a lot of hands. We have some great hands that can really, if we hit hard, it can crack some of these big hands that he's got. And with all this board coverage that we got, we can hit a lot of different flops, a lot of ways that we can put pressure on our opponents because we have drawing equity for further streets right there. So we're not just straight bluffing with deuce 3 offsuit. We have hands, a lot of hands, that can flop some decent equity that we can put pressure on the opponents with. So that's how we just look at 2 ranges in general. Now let's go ahead and connect it to HoldEq. So if you haven't seen it before, this is what it looks like. You could come in here and just enter whatever random range that you want like that. But we want to connect our Flopzilla windows with HoldEq. So what you do is you hit this little symbol here, you mouse over the window that you want it to connect to. We want this one to connect to the opener's range. We want this one to connect to the caller's range. And then bam, there you go. It just already did the equity calculation. The opener's range has 55% equity. We have 45% equity. Hot and cold, no flop, no nothing, nothing inputted just yet. So that's how we do it. That's how we connect the windows. Now, the next thing is we want to do some range versus range analysis. And of course, we could see the equities right here. There are some other tabs. I'm not going to get into that right now. It's just too much stuff to cover in just one video. I can hit these kinds of things later. But there's some bonuses, not bonuses, there's other features to HoldEq besides just the equity calculations here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to input that same range that we had before. So the 10-9-5, which gives us a lot of flush draws and whatnot. So now you can see as soon as you enter that board in, now that everything's connected, the board pops up here, and then of course it pops up right here, and the equities automatically calculate. So now he had the better equity pre-flop, but as soon as that flop came out, because of what kind of flop it was, our calling range suddenly, not really skyrocketed, but it at least shot above his range right here. So now we have the better range on the flop, more equity in this instance. So what you want to do now is consider a lot of the same things that we did on the prior hand. So we have equity and we have possibly the better hand, but not always. So we want to ask ourselves the same things. We're in position, he checks to us. If we bet, what is he going to fold? And if we check behind and if he decides to lead the turn, what are we going to do at that point? So you can start putting in some different turn cards and river cards to continue that type of analysis. But what you want to do basically is just continue to just ask yourself questions to figure out what your range can do versus his range. What's he going to fold out? What bet sizings do I need to make to get him to fold if we're bluffing? What bet sizes do I need to make to get him to call if we're going for value? Let's say that let's just clear this. Let's say we just ended up having pocket tens and then we flop top set here. Well, if we bet, we want to bet a good amount to get him to call. We don't want him to fold out all of his hands at this point, So that's the kind of thing that we use all of this for. And you can see right now with pocket tens, we have 92% equity in this instance. But let's put that back. Call versus a nit right here. There's that. So studying with Flopzilla this way is super great practice. You learn so much by looking at how different ranges hit different boards and comparing those results with ranges that will likely battle them. Just like this example of a nitty opening range versus a likely cold calling range. I guarantee that the more you do this, the more these calculations and results will just be a part of your game. They'll stick in your head, and you'll notice during your gameplay great spots to fire at the flop as a bluff, or spots where you should check behind, maybe spots where you should go for value, or different spots where you should be bluff catching. So if you don't have Flopzilla yet, I suggest you get to it. And if you haven't downloaded your free copy of HoldEq, get it so you can start this range v range analysis for yourself. Thank you so much. So everybody, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.